Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Writers Chat Tuesday, where craft connects community. I am one of your co-hosts, Brandy Bro, and I have my fellow co-hosts with us, Melissa Stroh and Nora Poor. Johnny is still off today. She'll be back with us in September. No, it's September. October. She'll be back with us in October. We have a really great session today. We're really excited to talk about putting Christ into psychological thrillers. I think I got that right. And we have a special guest with us today, and I'm going to turn the spotlight over to Melissa, who's going to introduce her.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Writers Chat. We're so excited to share our guest with you today. I was kind of a newbie to learn about our special guest. I was talking with my friend Heather Day Gilbert, who was a past guest of ours, talking about cozy mysteries and other things, and we got to talking about the topic of psychological thrillers and how much we'd love to have a guest address this topic. And she said, "Have you heard of D.L. Wood?" And I'm like, "No, tell me more." And she's like, "She would be perfect for this topic." And so she helped me connect with her. And so we're going to share with you today. Well, she's going to share to you today what we're going to talk about, but I will give you a quick intro on her for those of you who may be like me and have not heard of her and her work. So, um, USA Today bestselling author D.L. Wood shows how thrillers can deliver pulse-pounding suspense while staying grounded in Christian faith. Discover how clean, faith-filled psychological thrillers compare to mainstream suspense and why stories of both danger and redemption matter. And then D.L.'s going to share with us today faith in the shadows, writing thrillers that grip without compromise. So I'm going to turn it over to you, DL, and let you just take it away, and then we can open it up later for more question and answer if everyone would like. So thank you for joining us. Excited to hear from you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here and I appreciate the invitation. I always love speaking with readers who enjoy suspense. It's such a great community. So thank you for having me here today to kind of talk about something close to my heart. I don't know about you guys, but I've been a reader since I was, well, 3. So I love books. I love stories. When I was 9, the optometrist said if I don't stop reading books in the dark at night, I'm going to lose my eyesight. So I've just always loved reading and in particular suspense. I grew up on the Meg books and Trixie Belden and Bobbsey Twins and all of that. So this was a perfect fit for me when I decided to try my hand at writing and really loved the fact that there were stories with kingdom purpose that allowed us to still enjoy those tenets of the genre that we do, but to not compromise who we are or what we believe in the course of that entertainment. And also to allow that entertainment to be more than just entertainment, but to also touch our hearts and to maybe make us think, or to provide encouragement, or maybe God's perspective on some really tough issues as someone's reading that. So that's kind of my background as to how I got into this particular genre. So what I'd love to talk about today is just that, faith and thrillers. And I tend to read a lot of different things, and I read a lot in the mainstream market as well as in the Christian market. I've read both, obviously, and what I find is there's great stories in both, but there does seem to be a difference in the focus of the mainstream thrillers, in particular psychological thrillers, because those tend, if you've read them, to be rooted in a lot of domestic animosity and domestic um, secrets, and oftentimes even protagonists that are not likable. And so the struggle is creating a psychological thriller that gives you someone, not only someone to root for, but isn't focused on either elevating um, behavior that would be in contradiction to our faith principles, or keeping it from just being something that weighs you down. I don't, sometimes I've read those books, and while the stories are really good at the end of it, I just feel kind of yucky. Like there was nothing redeeming about it. Maybe the protagonist was likable, and maybe justice won out in the end, but there wasn't anything in it that bettered my world. I wasn't any better for having read it. And not that that has to be the case for every book you read at all. I'm not saying that. But for me, it was just such a lack of it sometimes. And that's not always the case. I've read lots of mainstream thrillers that are really good. And I try to look at those when I am crafting mine to say, okay, what components of this can I pull out and use? So I think you can do it. And I've made some notes. So if you see my eyes going this way, that's why. But one of the things is how can Christ and Christian values be conveyed in a way in a psychological thriller without compromising? So, in a thriller, what do we look for? We're looking for, they thrive on that darkness, that danger, that tension that's always there. So, but as a Christian author, how do we do that without being too intense with it? Where the imagery is just, again, there's nothing redeeming about it. Or how do we do it with incorporating emotional depth, because that's what a lot of these psychological thrillers have, but without crossing a line into either glorifying or elevating things that we wouldn't want to elevate. So in my particular book, my psychological thrillers are in a series. It's more of a compilation. They're not one, two, three kind of series, but it's the Deadly Decisions series. And there's three books in that: The Vow, The Offer, and The Choice. And my goal was to create a psychological thriller type book that had a lot of Agatha Christie notes to it, a lot of atmospheric value and imagery, but also to stay clear of those things that I don't like reading about. And it is difficult because, again, part of the recipe of mainstream thrillers is so much of what we don't want to elevate. So, how do I do that? So, because there is an overlap, at their core, Christian and mainstream thrillers are hoping for the same thing, and that they're, to provide twists, suspense, sort of a whodunit element, and to surprise the reader. Um, so, what I try to do is provide an atmosphere that can be just as dangerous and questionable, but obviously I'm leaving out the language. I'm leaving out the sexual content that we don't want to read about. They're clean thrillers, but they still focus on there are things that happen in the world that we have to deal with. I try to follow the rule of how does the Bible treat this subject? The Bible has multiple accounts of things that we don't want to emulate. It doesn't ignore the fact that that exists in the world, that people fall victim to those things and have to deal with them. The key is to address those in a way where it's providing a method for doing that without stumbling into that hole of kind of swimming or marinating in the darkness. And so while I have affairs and murders and lies and people who have made decisions that are poor, my goal is for the heroine or hero to be able to either, if it was them, be redeemed from it, or two, if it was someone else, for them to find a way to cope with it, to heal from it as part of the story through either growing faith in God or a faith arc, or maybe there's a seed that's been planted. So um, let me go to one of the things I did want to talk about was how you keep tension high without using graphic content or explicit language. And part of that answer, it goes back to one, treat it like the Bible treats it. In the Bible where it says he cursed the tree or he did this or he, I don't mean Jesus, I'm talking about in the Old Testament. They don't use the words. And so my goal is to take that and say, okay, how do I do that? And so if there is a character who's a villain or someone who has an issue, who struggles with this particular thing, I might incorporate it, but I'm going to say, you know, he cursed and held the gun up, or he cursed or did whatever, and or she, whatever the case may be, so that I can still make it real without compromising the text. Because I don't know about you guys, but for me in particular, and there are other genres that deal with this, and that's great. But for me, with my thrillers, I do want them to have gravity. I want that there to be a gravitas in them that is maybe absent from, say, cozy mysteries, or a different genre that might be a little bit fluffier, and not in a bad way. It's just maybe sometimes what we want is something a little bit lighter. But when I'm reading thrillers, I want something that's realistic in the sense of it feels like it's coming from where we exist right now, not something that would never be said, where I can't ever see myself having a conversation. When people speak, um, in this particular genre, if they speak in like Sunday school language too much for me, I feel like I can't relate because that's not a conversation I would have every day. Now, that would that be a conversation I might have with a fellow believer in a certain context? Absolutely. Would that be a conversation I might have if I was being chased down by a murderer who's holding a gun on me? Probably not, for whatever reason. So, I think it's important to try to keep that tension going where you don't violate what we would want to put in our minds, but at the same time, you make it realistic. So I try to raise emotional stakes, not so much through, say, gore or inundating someone with the actual language, but more on emotional content, emotional twists, maybe betrayal or loss, or maybe some kind of disappointment or a relationship that's struggling. And I try to put an emotional um, hinge on whatever the actual danger, physical danger is that's involved. And so I try to pull, whereas say a mainstream book might do that more with a gore aspect or making the danger so awful that you're riveted by the fact that that is so scary you don't want that to happen to the protagonist. And that's not the case with all of them, but some of them do that. I try to pull it into more of an emotional fear or an emotional um, just perspective where they are churned up and the reader is churned up by wanting to protect that protagonist's emotional state. Um, so I try to raise the emotional stakes rather than just the physical stakes. I do focus on psychological suspense by allowing my readers to use their imagination as opposed to giving every detail. For instance, if there was, say, a murder in a particular book, rather than describe it in gory detail or ad nauseum, what I try to do is give enough, usually like three things that will allow a reader to then extrapolate their own picture. If I say there's a mansion on a hill, you could be imagining a whole lot of different things. And some writers will go in and give you, three paragraphs of specifics. What I prefer to do is give you, a Victorian mansion, lavender in color, on the top of a hill with rocky waves crashing below. And that may be all I say on that. And then you're allowed to pull the rest of it in. And you probably created your own picture in your mind. And some of them would be close and some of them would not be. And I try to do the same thing with pivotal scenes of danger. I'm going to give just enough so you can create an image in your mind of what's happening and allow the emotional connection to ramp up and the tension to ramp up, but without spending three paragraphs on describing the blood or the wound, whatever it is. And that can be difficult sometimes. Now, a lot of psychological suspense in mainstream does not focus on that. That's more the action component of it. With psychological suspense, the struggle really does become your subject matter. I've read Sherry Lapina and I've read Ruth. I love Ruth Ware, but what I do find in some books is this, just like I said before, the characters themselves and maybe what they're engaged in. The ones where the neighborhood's bad and everybody has secrets and it's all awful and they're just with each other and it's just nuts. And so those tend to those are the types of plot devices that a lot of psychological thrillers, in particular domestic ones, are built on. And so it's hard for someone trying to keep a book uplifting to use those devices. So I tend to steer clear of a lot of the domestic things. Now, I have had elements of that where there's a relationship at issue that's questionable. But I've tried to put it in an environment where it's not the only thing, and it's just not one after the other, after the other, after the other of bad relationships or people um, just behaving in a way that would not be something that we would want to focus on for an extended period of time. So, uh, primarily, what I've talked about so far is the way Christian psychological thrillers or suspense stories differ from mainstream. But in a lot of ways, the goal is the same. You want to create a protagonist that your readers love, that they get invested in really early on. Provide a hurdle, a struggle that is something that people can relate to, both emotionally and maybe in reality. And then set up a lot of difficult circumstances that they have to work through to ultimately get to a place where they are successful in either overcoming the hurdle or healing from the hurdle, whatever it might be. And what I also like to do is provide an arc. I try to either in my books provide an arc of faith or a grounded, mature faith that is just underlying the story. So it just provides context for how someone deals with it. Um, that's my goal with the faith aspect of it. Some writers make it much more I don't want to say patent, but much more of a mainstream part of the plot. Mine, it sort of takes a back seat because my goal is to create a great story that is uplifting and entertaining. And so I also want to try to create a story that non-believers will read. My goal is also to plant seeds. Now, that doesn't mean I don't write for my Christian audience because I do, but I have different collections or series with different approaches to the faith element so that I have something for everyone. I'm not trying to be multiple things, but I am trying to be conscious of the opportunity to use these books to reach people who might not otherwise ever hear the name of Jesus or consider it, or just even God in general. So, like my first series, the Unintended series, that series is a one, two, three series, and it is very apparent. It is very much at the forefront of that book. And it's a huge arc from book one to book three of a non-believer to a believer that is grounded. And then my other books, it varies. It's a variety, but that is my goal too, is to create content that someone could pick up and say, "Hey, read this book. It's really good." And then they get a little bit of God in it. They get a little bit of faith. They get a little bit of, oh, hey, this person is going through a tough situation. And I realize this is make believe, but the faith that's at the root of this story is not. So that's sort of my approach to the overall scheme of these stories. Again, if you're writing a psychological thriller, it might differ from something that's more of an action thriller or something that's more of a mystery. They all have subtle nuances where you're ramping up tension in different ways. But for the most part, all of those have a similar struggle when we try to write um, stories that are rooted in bad things happening and to keep them uplifting. So, um, I don't know if I've talked too long or if I'm good or if you guys would like me to take questions or if you want me to keep going.
You're doing great. We do have some questions, and one of them did kind of pertain to something you talked about just a
Sure.
little bit ago. I got to scroll up to find the question in the chat here. Um, she was wondering, Sally was wondering if you might be able to give us just a little definition of the differences between a cozy mystery, a suspense, or a thriller, or a psychological thriller.
Cozy mystery and psychological thriller. Sure. Well, as I read once, first of all, that is a great question. There's no easy answer. And I think that's a question that most people, even in the industry, would have difficulty sometimes answering because they do overlap sometimes. I once read that the difference was about $500,000. if you're talking about mainstream authors that have made it big, because the thrillers are the ones that pay a lot. Not so with the Christian genre necessarily at all, but well, cozy mysteries, those are the ones. And if you think about covers, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but we all do. And there's a definite theme to different genres. So if you think about cozy mysteries, those are going to be the ones with animals on the cover, little stories that happen where someone owns a bookstore or someone owns a coffee shop and solves mysteries on the side, or maybe it's a group of ladies that belong in or that live in a retirement home who all solve mysteries together. The mysteries have lower stakes. There may be a murder in them. There can be often, usually there is, but there's no blood, there's no gore, there's no discussion of that at all. It's rarely from the perspective of the perpetrator. And the tension ramps up just from following clues and the interaction, usually relationships of the people within the story, where there's no tension between them, but the way they interact with the community around them. Oh, I'm seeing something. Hallmark Tea Garden Mysteries. Yeah, exactly. So, pretty much, if you can imagine it on Hallmark, it's probably more of a cozy mystery. If you watch it on Masterpiece PBS Mystery, it's probably more of a thriller, um, or more of a suspense story. Those tend to be less light. I mean, they do have some that aren't, but most of them are. Uh, so really, it's about stakes. It's about how the crimes are described and how much time is spent on those. It's also where does the tension come from? And usually there's less action in a cozy mystery. It's more of like, say, um, the library reveal where everybody you kind of find out someone has um, that's been in our midst all along has done this. And again, there's less twists in a cozy mystery. It's usually more about the relationship of the people inside them. With a psychological thriller, you're dealing with a lot of emotional tension and struggle of the protagonist, the main character. You're usually dealing with some maybe secrets, deeper and darker things going on behind the scenes. Potentially, there's a lot of there can be crossover with, say, police procedural elements, and you're going to find your serial killers in that. You're going to find your a lot of your cold cases in that. And again, probably plots where it plays with the mind of the protagonist. That's like the dictionary definition of a psychological suspense. Where the person ends up, they're basically being gaslit, or they think they're crazy, but they're not crazy. That's kind of, I think, how it started, but they've become so popular that has really branched out, where that's not the only definition of it anymore, but for the most part, that's the case. Yeah, thriller, just think, it's more serious. There's a lot more gravity. It's not as light and funny. Um, that's what I would say the difference is.
I think it's a good definition. Yeah. We did have another question. Where was that at?
Leslie has it.
All right.
In your stories, is it the victims or the villains who heal? And how do you show healing of a villain while still showing justice?
Wow, that's a really deep question.
Hmm.
Good one too. So, well, I'm running through my books in my mind. So with the protagonist, usually it's the protagonist because that's who you're following. That's who you are emotionally invested in. And to serve the reader, I have a post or a print up in my writing room that says, "Take care of your reader." So I don't write just for me, because the worst thing in the world is to read something and get to the end and you're like, "What? I spent 8 hours doing this, and this is how you ended it." And I'm not saying every ending has to be exactly what we want, because that's not how life works. But I do want to take care of my reader. If I sign a contract with the reader in the beginning of my book that I'm going to deliver certain expectations or meet certain expectations, I want to do that. So if I create a heroine that they like, my goal is to develop that heroine in a way that is satisfying. And so that for me means an arc of healing. Now, in a series, it might take several books to get there, but the goal is to be on that journey. And there might be setbacks, but the goal is to constantly be, you might come down, but then you're up, but you're moving towards healing. Now, with a villain, trying to think, um, I have written villains that ultimately we get to see inside to understand motivation, to get a better sense of why they are the way they are, why what's important to them is important to them, and why they behave the way they do. I would say that there have been passages where that they are brought to a maybe to a different level of understanding or behavior, or maybe they realize something and it changes how they act or their approach. I can't off the top of my head, if I'm being honest, think of a place where I've completely redeemed them, but it's clear in the books that that can happen, that redemption is available. But I don't know that has served the stories that I've written. So I don't know that it would be something that I could incorporate. Now, it can happen, but I think you have to set out to do that and frame the plot in such a way where one, it doesn't come out of the blue. Because again, you can't have a villain that is just bent on doing something all along, and then at the end of the book, they're like, "Oh, wait, I was wrong," and then they're great. So it is. If your question is a good one, because it is very difficult to do that, and I think you would have to start your story with that in mind. Think you also have so many words to write these stories in, and that is something that would take up a significant amount of pages if you're going to achieve that in a way that's realistic and feels organic. So again, you would have to set out to write a book where you're seeing as much of the villain side of things as you are the victim side of things, because otherwise I don't feel like it would be organic. But you can do it. I don't I'm trying to think if
Well,
I've done it.
you could take a story and instead of having you could have your main character be an antagonist and then have
You
that
could.
character's journey be
Right.
that kind of arc. So they go from it's a positive change arc from, the negative where they are. So that would give them more story time, more page time to develop that.
Hmm.
And that might be part of the solution if that was the goal of the story.
Exactly. Yeah, you could totally do that. And you're right. And that's what I think we're saying the same thing. You would have to set out from the beginning to achieve it, and either come at it from telling a story from their viewpoint, or give them enough page time where you're able to achieve that. Now, I will say I have done that with secondary characters for sure. There are secondary characters that for the lack of a better term, see the light, or decide, okay, this behavior is not right, or oh gosh, I was really wrong in this. And then you end up liking them more at the end, and they kind of find a way to bring their behavior into line, bring their thoughts into line. But in my personal writing, it's mostly been secondary characters. However, that's a great idea, and I'm going to make a note of that, because that would be a really interesting story to write, and a fantastic exercise. And I think it would be unique, particularly in Christian thrillers, because again, that's the struggle we face. Is have you guys ever read Jessica Patch?
I have heard of Jessica Patch.
So Jessica is fantastic. And her books are dark. They're Christian thrillers, but they are dark. She's probably the darkest, at least that I'm aware of. Meaning she tackles really dark subjects, a lot of serial killers. She's tackled domestic thrillers. She's tackled all of it. And she does it really well. Her faith element is a major part of her stories, which is how I think you would have to address those to keep them from being so dark that it's overwhelming.
Yeah,
It,
I think that's the difficulty of writing from a villainous viewpoint because you risk putting your own soul at risk. Because you have to get inside the head of a
Mhm.
character that is just so dark. And at some point you really have to weigh the cost because there will be a cost to write that kind of character. You can't write a convincing character without getting into darkness. And then
Yeah.
that, really leads you to ask, should I be doing this as a Christian? Is this really where I should be, or am I harming myself in doing this? And the only reason that I mention this because this has been something that's been going on a lot in my own mind as I've been kind of doing a little bit of changing as a writer, as a person. Um, and I think of the story in the Bible of the 10 virgins. Five brought oil, five did not. Five were ready, five were not. In some of the things that we write, it may be permissible. We may not lose our salvation, but we may squeak in by the skin of our teeth into heaven and not realize it. Do we want to risk that, or do we want to put away anything that could possibly hinder us and make sure that everything is on mark and we are headed toward the kingdom? And so that leads me to ask myself, because I know I tend to gravitate towards darker stories, is this worth the cost for me? Should I do this? Should I change what I'm doing? Should I present it differently? So this whole conversation, this whole topic is um, really an important one, a really good one, and something you really have to ask yourself because anything that we write, we're not only affecting readers, but we're affecting ourselves. And we don't want to be trying to give some of our oil to people that are not prepared and jip ourselves and be shut out of the wedding feast.
I think that's a really good point, and it's universal in to everyone, meaning whatever you're engaged in, whatever career path you're on, are you doing what you need to do? Are you doing what's beneficial, even though it's permissible? Is it beneficial? So I think the short answer to your question there is, what has God called you to do?
Mm.
In particular with these stories, if God has not called me to write those stories, I do not he's called me to a certain level of gravity in my stories, and I don't feel compelled to go any further. Um, Pat or Jessica, she writes differently. And I know her heart is for Jesus. And if that's what he's called her to do and to treat it, then she's doing what she's supposed to do. But like you said, each one of us has to evaluate that because I do think it's important to what she's able to show and what other Christian writers that tackle those really dark, difficult subjects well are able to do is provide a blueprint for how we address the really dark, difficult, tragic things in our lives.
Yeah.
And so it does cost something to do that. So you have to make sure that God has asked you to pay that cost. He's asked you to do that before you just start going down that road because it can be, it is heavy. I write from the villain's viewpoint often in my suspense, but not at the level that where it doesn't cost me anything in that sense because I won't say anything, but it's not that kind of darkness. So, but her writing is excellent. If you've never read it, if you like those kinds of stories for what for yourself, check her out because she's really good. And again, what she's very balanced. I don't think you could write those and do it justice without the also balancing with the um, level of faith that she incorporates into those stories. So,
Great. Thanks. Do you want to invite everybody back on and have some more discussion?
absolutely.
All
All
righty.
right.
So anybody that would like to turn your cameras back on. And if you have a question, you can use the little raise hand feature. So we're being a little orderly. That will help. Um, and if there's any other questions in the chat, just raise your hand so you can ask them because I'm not sure if I missed them or I got the ones that I saw. Melissa, did you see others?
Yeah, I am scrolling through now just to see if there are. And if anybody has put a question in and they don't want to get on camera but would like us to read it for
Yeah,
them, yeah,
totally
let
can
us
do
know in
that.
the chat. And we'll definitely do that.
I do appreciate this topic because it's something, as you can tell, that I've been kind of wrestling with a little bit. And I think that the content of my stories will be changing. I'm just not sure how it will be changing. And sometimes you can just sit there and think, what is the point? If I can't do this and I can't do that, and I need to make a distinction and I need to set myself apart and be unique and show that I am not the same as the rest of the world as a writer, how do I do that? Because it's really tough, but at the same time, there is the call to be the light on a hill.
Mm.
Um, and story, I have this little thingy on my computer. Stories make friends and arguments make enemies. And golly, I can't remember. Where'd that come from? Somebody we have here frequently, and it's just spacing out of my mind. And I'm not even sure if it was original to him or he got it from somewhere else. But stories, they illustrate, they knock down people's walls. They come to story wanting to be entertained, and truth can slip in because
Mhm.
they don't have those walls up and they're not ready to combat in a debate like they would be if you come at them with a nonfiction topic. So stories have a way of disarming, and then you can smuggle the gospel in, so to speak, but it's not really smuggling because truth is truth, and we shouldn't be hiding it. We should be putting it out there, and people are free to pick it up or reject it as they want to. And we're not called to argue, we're just called to present the gospel, and story is a great way to do that. Pam?
Not really a question so much as maybe an observation of I don't read psychological thrillers, watch them, like them. But because of that's my emotional makeup. So I used to think, oh, I should try to write all the things. We don't have to write all the things. We write what God's called us to write. I think this is a fascinating subject. I'm a children's book author, right? But I think this is a
Oh, nice.
fascinating subject. And I like learning about all the stuff I don't write because you never know what you're going to get out of it. But yeah, we don't God's called us all to share Jesus in different ways, I think. And so psychological thrillers are not my way, but boy, do I know friends who love them. And so I love to get good ones to be able, because, everybody gets a book at Christmas.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's true. It is fascinating, and here's kind of what's interesting about it on another level. So, in my experience, the Christian fiction market tends to follow the mainstream market in about 5 years lapse. And so, what we have coming towards us is this real emergence of the thriller, but not like a military thriller or action adventure thriller, which is what they've typically been in the past, but this sort of psychological domestic thriller genre. And so it presents a real issue for those of us that write thrillers and suspense. How do we tackle that? Because we got to do it well, because that's what people are looking for. And we do want to present the kinds of stories they want to read if we're called to write those, but present it in a way where it's an entertainment they would pick up, but it doesn't compromise. And if by the nature of the genre itself, it tends to compromise, how do we adjust for that? And that's that line we walk. And I think we found ways to do it. But I don't know that this particular genre or this type of book will be able to mirror the mainstream market exactly like the other ones are able to do. Cozy mysteries or just a murder mystery or police procedural, they can. But because by its nature it contains this element that is problematic, we have to figure out how to deal with that. And so that's just part of the fun of figuring it out.
It's like it's really hard to write in the fantasy genre and get around magic.
Mm.
Um, because God's word says that magic and witchcraft, it's evil. So how do you work with that? Some people will compromise and others will not. And it's tricky to find a holy path through the fantasy forest.
Yeah, I love fantasy in the sense that like my if you look at Lord of the Rings, and there is magic in that and wizardry, but it's definitely a Christian allegory. So I think that the key for that is to make certain that it's an allegory that can be um, played out where people can understand that it's an allegory and what it represents as opposed to what it actually is or it trying to be that thing. But I don't write fantasy, but this I do love the story sometimes.
Kathy has a question. Would you like to share yours, Kathy?
It's not as much of a question as a statement. Somebody asked how to almost insulate ourselves so that we're not insulate ourselves from things, but so that we're keeping that bubble of what we can sustain ourselves. And I put in the thing there. I had just gotten back from Killer Nashville a couple weeks ago and was on a panel and also was there by myself. And I'm usually at like American Christian fiction writers with friends that can help that what we talk about and everything. Well, at Killer Nashville, I was by myself. And I also know that I judge for them as well. So here's some things I've done is I have told the judge, the lady that coordinates it, don't send me anything that's going to be like where I'm going to have nightmares because I will have nightmares. And she knows, and she has already said, okay, if I do unintentionally send you something that's getting too much, just send it right back to me. Just tell me, and we'll get you a different book. So working with people and letting them know your boundaries, really helpful.
Mm.
But I do think we need to, and this is personal opinion, I think we need to keep our boundaries around us, but also let God lead us because he led me to a couple things at Killer Nashville. There was a person I talked to, two persons, in fact, that I never would have gravitated towards, but for some reason they got plopped right in front of me. And they were two of the most wonderful conversations I had. And so it's one of those give and takes, but the give and take is with God and me, not with the others. So, not to be preachy or anything, but boundaries and making sure I did my morning Bible study and stuff before I left for class, which
Mhm.
was getting up earlier than I really wanted to. But it helped that because you do have to watch what we're doing, what we're letting in.
Absolutely.
Well, and I do love that because I think that it's very unique to write in the Christian fiction genre. We have to deal with things that people in the mainstream don't. And in particular, I love my readers, but faith, especially if you're bothering to pick up Christian fiction, faith matters to you, right? Typically speaking. And everyone comes at it with their own perception or their approach to faith. And while we have certain tenets that are true for all of us, we all have little things that we prefer, or this, maybe we disagree on this aspect, or we agree on this aspect. So it's hard to write for Christians in the sense that you're you are addressing something that is near and dear to their heart. And so it can make readers frustrated if they don't agree with something that you put in the book or if it doesn't address a certain topic enough. I have gotten reviews where I'll have one person say she didn't deal with Jesus enough, and the very next review on Amazon says she talked about Jesus too much. So, and that's okay. That's okay. That's what I signed on for. But that is the one of the struggles we have as Christian fiction authors is how do we do that well? And the reality is ultimately where you land is you pray about it and you write the way you feel that you're called to write and you let the chips fall where they may. And as long as you're being um, honest with yourself and you are following what you believe God is telling you to do, you can't do any more than that. So, and I think stepping out, what you were talking about, Kathy, is really important. It's one of the reasons that my new series, that the first book just was released as part of an anthology through Lisa Phillips's publishing company. It's Secrets Along the Shore. But my book is All That Lies Beneath, and it's a new PI, a private investigator series. It's a suspense thriller rooted in kind of mystery, but the faith element for her is she's a mature Christian. This is just her rooting allows her to do what she does and not fall apart, to do what she does and know that there is something better, and to stay grounded when she is faced with addressing tragedy. And I'm really, my plan when it releases on its own is I'm going to probably put it as just, I'm going to market it just as a regular mainstream book because I want to also encourage people who are just picking up mainstream books, both Christians and non-Christians alike. There are how many millions of Christians out there that read fiction all the time and have never touched a Christian fiction book. So I want to provide that to them. And the only way I'm going to get in front of them is if I go to them. If I don't go to them, it's not going to happen. And so I will probably take some backlash from people that maybe don't get or align with that idea. But my goal is, hey, I'm going to put this in front of them. It has some faith in it, and hopefully they will like the books and maybe seek more out that do have a more obvious or stronger faith plotline. Or maybe they'll pick up the Bible, which is probably the place they should go for that, not maybe necessarily my fiction book. So I want to plant a seed. That would be my goal. So it'll be an interesting little journey that I've got ahead of me if that's what I end up doing, and that's kind of looking like what I'm going to do.
Awesome.
Sounds very interesting.
We do have another question in the chat from Madeline. She wants to know, do you ever write characters that have negative arcs? And if so, how do you show such characters changes over the course of their stories?
I'm mentally scanning all my books. I've written 10 books. I don't fast release like a lot of my friends who do an amazing job of that. My brain does not work that way. I would be in a facility if I if I tried to do that. Um, so I'm trying to think through mine. A negative arc. I think no, I don't think so. But I do think I've written I mean books where you the exposure is negative, meaning you learn over the course of the book as the reader your understanding of who this person is, that you realize they are just not good people for whatever reason, whether it be a main character of the villain or a secondary character, whatever the case may be. So I can't say that I've ever written someone with a negative arc or as the protagonist. Now, you could do that much more easily with a villain. And I'm trying to think if there may have been situations where I've written someone who, because of the circumstances that arise throughout the book, they just continue to make poor choices and it gets worse as it goes. That's probably something I've done. But as far as just going from solid to not solid, I don't know that I've done that, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
But you could do it. I'm sure people have done it and done it well.
absolutely. Are
And
there
again, I'm going to note for that the challenge there would be to keep the reader, to take care of your reader and keep them interested emotionally. Because if I start reading about someone who um, is taking a downward turn, I've got to see some possibility for redemption at the end, or if I really love them and see that. So it's a great question because it would be a challenge for a writer and one that might be worth undertaking is to how do you do that in a way where it holds that attention and in a good way.
Yeah, we had a good example in the chat, at least from the fantasy arc, talking about the character Boromir in Lord of the Rings being a perfect
Mm,
example of a negative
he
arc.
is. Yep. 100%. But he was redeemed in the end, if you
Yep,
remember.
yep, he
So
was.
you do have to somehow, if you get that invested, I think you have to ultimately redeem them, even if it's split second, momentary, like, his was very quick. So,
Mm-hmm. For sure, I
Now, I
agree.
have to say, sometimes I do write stories with negative change arcs, and I leave them not redeemed because I want readers to understand that if you take this path, this will be your consequence.
Mm-hmm.
and you have a purpose in that. So I think that you are treating it. I just think it has to be intentional. I think
Yeah,
there has to
it
be a
does.
plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when that message is absolutely clear and solid, I think it
Mhm.
resonates without having to beat the subject. You make it obvious and you make the consequence
Right.
obvious. The
Yeah.
readers are intelligent and they'll draw the
Yeah.
conclusions for sure.
But
Well, that's
often
it. Yeah.
there is a contrast within the story of this is where you could have been and you chose this. So it's not just all dark in depth and everything's doom. There's always the contrast to
Mm.
show you made the wrong choice, buddy. Yeah.
Well, are there any other questions from the floor or anybody you'd like to ask DL something?
Yeah, I posed it as a question in the chat, but um, I have some characters like in a couple of my stories that are villains, and I include a lot of backstory um, to show the pain because I believe that those that hurt are ones that have been deeply hurt. But how do you write this stuff and then not let it affect your spirit? I mean,
Mm.
I know, I'm always in the word. I'm always, trying to read not self-help, but Christian nonfiction as well, to keep my spirit up. But it can be pretty dark when you're writing some of this stuff, but it's needed because there's two sides that need to be shown.
Mhm. That's a really good question. So I have a habit recently of, so my daughters are on Instagram. They're grown out of the house and I can kind of see their lives a little bit when I see their posts here and there. And what I'll catch myself doing is end up scrolling and I see these amazing things in people's houses and the way they've decorated their houses. And I'm like, oh, that's so awesome. And then I'll flip another one and then I flip another one. And then I find I've been doom scrolling and looking at the houses. And only at some point it stops making me feel like, oh, that's really neat. And now I'm feeling like, oh, my house doesn't look like that. Ugh, I can't do that. Ugh. And so I end up feeling worse. It's not beneficial to me. And so I think the same is true for books that we read. I think we're all different. God has created us all differently. And there are certain things that none of us should read because it's not biblical or none of us should put spend our time on. But for the most part, the things that are permissible, how do we do that and not fall in that deep dark hole that you're talking about? I think it's Leslie, right?
Right.
Um, so I think we have to pray and ask the Lord if this is something we're supposed to be doing. And as for me, honestly, my books do not, when I write them, and I've had serial killers. Now, I don't have, again, like I said, mine are not the deep, deep, dark ones, but bad things happen in my books. You can't write a murder mystery without something bad happening, but it's never once stuck with me. It's never once tortured me or kept my mind on things that are not fruitful. So for me, I do not feel like it's a problem. But I had to be careful about scrolling through TikTok or scrolling through Instagram for these houses. And I guess my point is we all have weaknesses and God knows He made us, He knows what those are. And so if He hasn't told me, and I don't mean like, if He has not laid on my heart that this is something I need to put down, if it's not bothering me in that sense, then I think I'm okay to do that. Now, I have the librarian at our church library. There are Christian fiction suspense books she can't read because she does do that. She has nightmares or she struggles with it. Can I read that book? Sure. It does not do that to me. Can she? No. And she probably shouldn't. And not as a judgment, just to say it's probably not beneficial for her. So I think the answer to your question is it's different for all of us. We have to temper what we do with approaching God and asking Him, and then being cognizant of those things that are not beneficial to us, that make our thought life or heart life worse than they were.
I guess this poses another question. If you're looking at a redemption of a villain or you want to share, the backstory of a villain, of why they got to where they are, what brought them to that point? Is it something that happened in their childhood? Is it just something mentally wrong with the person? You know, um, is it only in, because you talked about this already, is it only in Christian fiction that we should be writing this, or it should be secular? Because if we want, who is really picking up the Christian books? Is it people that are already Christian, or maybe they're lukewarm a little bit, need a little bit of encouragement? Where are we going to reach the lost the most? And so when you talk about the villains and you're writing about villains, if you're wanting to show any kind of redemption of them, and I can't think of a story, a secular story or a movie right at this point that shows a villain that had redemption and turned around. But I think of the stories of I've seen stories in the news where somebody lands in prison and they might have had a long rap sheet, but then something in prison, maybe it was something that maybe it was a um, ministry that came in and touched their heart, or something just changed them that they wanted to go 360 in their life. And then, they turned their life around. Maybe they became a lawyer that defends, you know, um, criminals or something, to turn around youth because they were, a distraught youth. So where is the best place to write these redemption stories of the villains? Because they need light too if they did turn around, or if we want to reach the villains that are in prison, that are sitting there doing nothing, and they have libraries in prison. I don't know what kind of books are put in there, but who are we trying to reach as Christians? It's not just Christians, it's also the lost. So where's the best place?
Yeah, and you are asking a question that is above my pay grade. It is a struggle, and I think everywhere is the answer. I mean, honestly, I think we can do it everywhere. I think you can write them in both. I think you can, as a Christian, when I first started writing, Christian fiction was really starting to come to the forefront as a genre, or not in the forefront, was being established as a genre. And you could suddenly get really good books, and that was 2015, but maybe even go back to maybe 2010, 2012, you could really get good books across, in multiple genres. I think good books in Christian fiction had existed for a long time, but maybe in certain genres, but they really started to get going and at least become something I was aware of. If they existed before, I wasn't aware of them. And that was really exciting because as a Christian, I like reading those stories where the person has the same, has a faith foundation and approaches life the same way I do. I want to say it made me feel a little bit less alone. It made me feel like, oh, there are people out there or there are stories to be told like this. And as a reader, that was really exciting and I wanted to get on board with that. But your point is well taken. We can also touch other people's hearts that maybe don't know Jesus, maybe don't have a relationship with the Lord. And that's a reason why I'd like to branch out into mainstream. And it may fall flat on its face. I'm trusting God's going to do what God's going to do. But we can reach people. Here's the difficulty with that. Like I spoke of before, we are basically entering into a contract with our readers when they start a book. When they buy, borrow, whatever, our books, we're entering into a contract with them. And if suddenly, let's say I buy a book because it's supposed to be a police procedural, and I read it, and in 20 pages, what it actually turns into is a World War II historical romance. That's not the contract I signed. And I would probably get a little irked about that. And the same is true for when people pick up books in mainstream and they get to page 25 and it's suddenly got all this faith in it because that's not what they signed on for.
Right.
So how do we do that? And that's a question I don't really have an answer for today. I mean, I'm recognizing the problem. How do we do that? The way I'm trying to do it right now with this particular series is present it just as an organic part of her life. I'm not preaching about it. I'm just talking about how it impacts her life. Um, that's how I'm approaching it. But that's not necessarily the right way or the only way. But I think it is the struggle. Um, if you incorporate any faith, you are running the risk of your career being ruined if you do it mainstream because you will get lots of negative reviews on Amazon or wherever else you buy books. And I think as writers, we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to put that on the line? And it's hard because it can be unfair. I mean, I'm hoping it works out. I can always shift gears, but that is a great question. If you figure it out, will you email me and let me know?
Yeah. It's just a common struggle with me, as a because I want to reach the lost, and I keep thinking, well, who are picking up these Christian stories? I'm not published yet, but I have my first two books that I drafted have that villain aspect where, I give the backstory of the villain of why they are the way they are, to give that flip coin, to give that understanding to the reader, to have not so much to like the villain, but to have compassion. There are broken people in the world that need reached, they need touched, that maybe nobody touched them ever. And we're the one person that can. So how do we bring that
Yeah.
story across?
Well,
You
that's
know,
so true. And it is tough to do. If you think about it, there are a rare few that have done it. Charles Martin is one of the ones that has. And I think the key to his stories, why they resonate with believers and non-believers alike and top the, New York Times bestseller list, it's because he does it organically. There is a lot of faith in some of his stories, but he does it in a way it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel preachy. And so it's almost like pulling back the curtain and looking into someone's life who happens to be a Christian or happens to be on a faith journey. Like you would pull back the curtain and look at someone who existed in, the Vietnam War and what they went through. It's it's not violating that contract because it is what it is and it's organically done. You don't feel like you've suddenly been ushered into a Sunday school class that you didn't mean to go to. And
right.
that's the difference. And it's so hard to do. And I would just say, I think we have to be super organic about how we handle it. I'm still trying to figure it out. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah.
Oh, Brandy, your mic's off. Or it's not connecting.
No, I had it off here. I was going to say, we recommend that everybody check out your books, Deanna. It's D.L. Wood and multiple series on there. I've already called a few up on Amazon, so I'm going to check those out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. Before we close the recording, we are going to talk about what's up next week, and that is Deb Haggerty from Elk Lake Publishing is going to come and share about small publishers, why it's good to go with one, the benefits of it, the ins and outs of what she does. And so that is going to be a great show. We have had some of our Writers Chat members published with Elk Lake, so come and check that out next week.
I'm one
And
of
if,
them.
yep, if you are catching the replay, we thank you for watching us on YouTube. Check out our Writers Chat at Facebook. It's Writers Chat Members is what it's called, but if you put in Writers Chat, you'll find it. That's if you want to come and join our shows live. We would love to have you. And we just thank you, Deanna, for being here today. This has been a really great
Absolutely.
discussion. Got me thinking about a lot of things, a lot of good things, and it's kind of hits me right where I am today. So I know there's others out there that are absolutely benefiting from this as well. So thank you for coming. We so appreciate you. And we will ask everybody to stick around after we close the recording for a short after party. And we'll see everybody next week. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye bye.